Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, February 11, 2016. Hello again, everyone. I'm ARIEL HELWANI, back inside our New York City studio. We were on the road last week, but so good to be back with the A-Team. We have a lot to discuss. Let's get into it. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. Over at the end is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com, and sitting right over there, turning 96 years young today, is the man in the shirt, the birthday boy, wow. Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post and SportsIllustrated.com. Happy birthday.
Oh, well, thank you.
How about that? You weren't expecting that.
No, I was not expecting that.
96, am I shooting low?
Let's just put it this way. I talked to Ken Shamrock the other day, who's fighting next week, and it is his birthday too, by the way. Happy birthday, Ken Shamrock.
Wow.
Yes, we had a discussion about that, and I said most people are saying you're too old to be fighting, but in my book, you're just a little kid. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well said. Happy birthday. Hope it's a great one. I suspect you'd rather be nowhere else but here.
Yeah, this is it.
Doing the beat.
This is my.
I had to spend my birthday here too. Kind of.
That is true.
That's all right.
Living the dream.
Okay, let's get into it, guys. I want to start this week talking about Yoel Romero. So his saga has been an interesting one over the past month. He was provisionally suspended by USADA for taking a banned substance. Not officially suspended because he decided to test his B sample, which came back positive. But as we found out earlier this week, he claims that the substance that he took, which he did not disclose, was contaminated. And USADA tested it, and that ended up being true according to him and his manager Malki Kawa. They also went ahead and tested random supplements from that same manufacturer. They bought their own essentially, and those were contaminated as well. I've come to learn that this is a big problem in the supplement world, and we will talk about that as well, where not everything that is on the ingredients label is actually in the substance itself. But here's the big question that I want to ask you guys. And Chuck, we touched on this last week, but now that he came out and spoke about it, I think it's a really interesting topic. In this day and age, USADA, drug testing, random drug testing. If it comes out that a fighter took a substance, 100%, but that substance on the surface was legal, but then it comes out that unknowingly it was contaminated, it had some kind of banned substance in it, how should that be treated? Should he walk away scot-free? Should he get a slap on the wrist? Or at the end of the day, if you take it, you got to pay the price.
I think you almost seem to try and segment out the real issue. I think the real issue is the supplementation industry. Because to answer your question, the only real way to hold them accountable, in my judgment, is you can say, well, be careful what you put in your body. Okay, well that basically means you can't take supplements, period, for the most part.
Which some people subscribe to, right?
Some people subscribe to, but I don't know that that's really all that fair. What they should have is a system where a fighter can say, here is what I've purchased, please test this. There should be an easy way for them to get, and they should not have to do it on their dime. If they don't test it and then they get caught, well, eat it, because you just took it and it doesn't matter. But here's the real issue. Folks think of the supplementation industry like big pharma. And in some cases, there are major, this is a $30 billion industry. There are major corporations involved in this. It's much more like the days of the MMA t-shirt guy. That is much more what this is like, where you have an affliction, there's a big company, and then you've got all the way down there, Jesus didn't tap. And somewhere in between, you've got tap out. It is a free-for-all. It is totally unregulated. Even in this state, the Attorney General went and tested herbal supplements at Walmart, Walgreens, Target, and GNC. He found only 20%. 20% had what they said they had on the ingredients list. Moreover, you can say, how can something be contaminated? It sounds like the dog ate my homework. It's not true at all. It's entirely plausible. Why? These are little manufacturing mom and pop shops for the most part. One day they're cycling in all the stuff that does have the pro hormones that are listed you can't have. And then the next day they put in what you're taking, which is not supposed to have it, but there is contamination residue. The FDA does not regulate supplements. They only regulate manufacturing standards. That's it. And they only regulate the manufacturers that they know to exist. Any donk can start up a supplementation company without a license and just start putting it out. So you mean to tell me if that's all legal, over-the-counter stuff like that, in an industry where we are literally awash in contaminated products. And the fighters are entirely responsible for that? I don't think so. I think USADA should bear some of the burden for that. And together, fighters and USADA, if they create a means for testing what you're taking, then they should be held accountable. But just to say, you fighter, you want to roll the dice with things that are entirely legal and have no way of knowing this is contaminated and it's all on you to figure it out, I say is completely and totally an unfair burden.
Yeah, I mean, what Luke said is there's a lot to unpack from that. I mean, there's so many different layers. Yoel Romero is a guy that people have accused of cheating in his fights, and so we set the bar at a different place probably for him than we would for somebody else. Just because I pick up a bottle that says vitamin D doesn't mean I can put anything I want in that thing. So even though the label says this is vitamin D, and I can put any kind of pill I want in there. So there's that. So we have to say, okay, is the athlete actually taking something that is what is said to be on the label? Then there's the whole idea of testing people and what is the wording they use when they just test the A sample? They say that they've suspected of failing a test. I forgot the actual word.
Provisionally suspended?
Provisionally, whatever. But basically, Romero gets pulled from a fight
Sure.
before it's been actually proven that he actually did anything. So I think that USADA needs to tighten that side of it up as well. There has to be some mechanism by which the UFC is not being asked to cancel fights before all the process has played itself out.
Well, some of that falls on the UFC's shoulders, right? Because the UFC is the one who's coming out and making this public. Like, I understand why they did it for Tim Means, because even if he went out and tested the B sample, even if he appealed it, it still wouldn't have happened before his fight on February 21st against Donald Cerrone. But in the case of Yoel Romero, it comes out that he failed this test, the A sample failed. And then he's labeled the worst human being on earth. Everyone's kicking him. Everyone's calling him a cheater. Everyone's saying, I told you so. But then wait a second, this thing comes up. And now his character has been assassinated. Now he's labeled a cheater. And now everyone's like, oh, of course you have an excuse. Well, what if this whole process played out behind the scenes? I'm a journalist. I love the transparency. I want more of that. But in this case, I kind of feel for the fighter. If in fact Tim Means and Yoel Romero and who knows who else down the line messed up by taking something that didn't have what it said it had, you got to feel for these guys, right?
Somewhat of the learning curve here. We discussed this a little bit last week, but I feel like all of this is so new, all of the out-of-competition testing. I feel like it's like everything else they do. They sort of stumble at first to sort of figure out the best procedure on this sort of thing. But certainly I agree with what you were saying. Like, Yoel Romero basically is now guilty until proven innocent. And it comes out that this is basically what's going on. And it's sort of unfortunate because, like you said, I think people sort of, it's almost like a Gleason T-bow. Remember when he kind of pops, everybody then says, oh, we knew it all along. We knew, yep, you know, that sort of thing. And he got the same treatment. And you'd like to see, I agree with you on the transparency, but you'd like to see them handle that sort of thing a little differently, I guess. Maybe until they get the B-Sem, maybe until they know the whole story. Because I feel like that's what's going on here is you're basically persecuting somebody for something that, like you were mentioning, Luke, like they don't really have the whole story on it yet. You know what I mean? Like the contamination and all those things. Like I thought what you just said is it's smart. If you're able to sort of test these things on whoever's dime, like other than the fighters, of supplementation, you're able to test these things and see what's kind of in them beforehand. There should be no issue. But the bottom line is if it's not labeled on there and you take it, and then you get busted for it. I mean, it's like one misunderstanding to the next that plays into perception. It's just not fair to the fighter, and ultimately it looks bad for the promotion. It looks bad for everybody.
Yeah, at the very least, these companies that are making supplements ought to have some deeper labeling responsibility. Like, you know, for example, my wife is allergic to nuts. So anytime I'm out shopping, I've become hyper aware of this in a way that I wasn't before I met her, because I would just go buy something, and if something had some nuts in it, big deal. It's not going to hurt me. Now I have to be aware. And we bought something that did not say anything about nuts, and it turned out that she wasn't feeling well after. Well, we found out later on that it was manufactured in a place that has nuts in the warehouse or in the factory, and they had not labeled it that way. Now most things you go to a store and buy in the supermarket, even you'll see, you know, manufactured in a facility that also uses tree nuts or whatever, and they just do that as a legal remedy to make sure that people who might be affected by it, you know, have a little bit of warning. It would be simple for these supplement manufacturers to say, you know, this is this is manufactured in a facility that also makes this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
And then it falls back on the fighter and the fighter's management to say, well, geez, do I really want to use that one, or do I want to go to that other company that maybe goes the extra mile to make sure that their facility is clean and is giving you exactly what it says it's in there and nothing else.
People think that it's like, well, don't take the crazy hormones, don't take the don't take the high end of the kind of stuff that GNC or Vitamin Shop or whatever sells. It's got nothing to do with that. There are any number of cases of people selling vitamin B that was laced with anabolic steroids. A woman who took this one company, her voice changed. She got kicked out of her choir because she couldn't, literally, she could not make the same notes anymore because she was taking vitamin B laced with anabolic steroids. It is in no way crazy at all for fighters to say this, and it sucks to admit this because this is the problem. I have no way of knowing if Yoel Romero was innocent.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is the state of the supplement industry is such that it is going to give camouflage to cheaters unless USADA either just keeps penalizing these guys like this, just, your responsibility, or they give them an out to say, look, if you bring it to us and test it and we clear it, we'll tell you this is contaminated or not, and you should be good to go. My last point about this: if you're Yoel Romero, and let's say he's innocent, and he made a good faith effort to purchase things that were not on the list and that are over the counter and legal, and he still gets busted, I do not believe that is fair. He tried to do the best he could with the information he had, even information that USADA lists on their website. That is unfair punishment to me.
I also think, okay, let's not be naive. I mean, 99% of the time when athletes these days say that I didn't take anything, they took it. But there is that 1%. And you feel for a guy like Romero, who was literally blasted by everyone. I mean, he was called the worst names in the book because of his past, because of the way he looks, perhaps. To me, if you nailed it. If you go out and say, if I'm an athlete and my reputation is all I have, let's just pretend it's Demetrius Johnson. Squeaky clean. And I'm assuming most guys take vitamins and things like that. Why wouldn't you just go that extra step and say, hey, Jeff Nowitzki, this is everything that I'm taking. Please let me know if there's anything wrong with this. Why not just do that? Because now you're covering yourself. If you do that and then something crazy happens along the way and it's infected or whatever, and there's other stuff in it that didn't come out originally, sucks. But if you don't do that, I think you deserve a punishment. What else can you do? Because there's no way of knowing if you're being honest. Like, do you guys agree? I think that Yoel Romero is going to be punished. I don't know if he should get the 2-year penalty.
That would be insane to me.
Yeah.
But you did take it. You did take a supplement. No one told you to take a supplement. I saw Ben Askren say that he's been so affected by the by the Olympic experience that he had that he doesn't take anything. He doesn't take a single thing because he's so deathly afraid. Can you imagine if you're Daniel Cormier and you get caught and you've had this?
But come on, he was competing as a 20-year-old. Yoel Romero was inching towards 40. It's a fight.
And he's had a neck. I get that.
Supplementation, when taken correctly, it does work, and it is helpful, and it is legal, by the way.
No, 100%. I just think you have to go that extra step. Like, Yoel Romero is now, a few months in, the poster boy here. If he is in fact innocent, you have to go the extra step and clear everything with the UFC. And they've actually come out and said, please do come to us. They've said this.
Good.
Tell us what you're taking. It's important. And one last point on it. It's somewhat ironic that here I am saying they're almost being too transparent because in the past, MMA promotions, and in particular the UFC, have been the complete opposite, right? I mean, I recall the Sean Shirk fight against BJ Penn, UFC 84. No mention whatsoever. UFC 80, when Penn was fighting for the vacant title against Joe Stevenson, no reason was given as to why the title was vacant. That to me was a bad look. In boxing, they're actually good at doing this. So it's funny for me to say, wait, you're being a little too transparent, but I think in this case they are. Like, we need to protect the fighters to a certain degree and their reputation.
I mean, I guess I would say that I wouldn't argue against transparency. I would just say that the process needs to be, as Chuck said, that we're sort of at the beginning of this whole thing. I think that the process needs to be streamlined to the point where if today it's revealed that I just failed a test for something, why do we need to wait for a long period of time before they can verify that? There shouldn't be a lag time. This whole thing, Romero basically is being robbed essentially of a title fight. Tim Means robbed of a main event slot. Now, maybe robbed is the wrong word because maybe these guys both did something that was wrong, but we don't know that. It's like these guys basically been pulled over, by the police, and everything goes away before they've actually had their day in court. Because essentially, the day in court is not that initial test. The day in court is when you challenge it and you have some way of you get to tell your side of the story. So we need to streamline the process so that it's all condensed. I don't care about the transparency, but because there are going to be people who immediately are going to say, "Oh, that guy got popped," and it's going to be nonsense because we know that if you wait 3 days or 2 days or something, you will have the full story. And then also the same thing about being able to test the supplements that you've decided to take. If I go in with those supplements, I better damn well bring a whole case of them because they got to test all that stuff. Just because I have today the ones that are manufactured in the facility today doesn't mean that the things that have the exact same label that Luke buys 2 months down the road,
sure, that's a problem.
His may be contaminated and mine may not be. So you need to be able to go to USADA and say, this is all the stuff that I've got, that's going into my body for the next 3 months. Have your way with it.
I would just say in 2016, man, if I'm a fighter on UFC's roster, I would err to the side of paranoia at this point because I just feel like we're going to see a lot of this going forward. A lot of these people, and you're probably going to hear similar stories to what Yoel Romero just went through with. Man, I just I was taking
that's
this.
Why,
it was
that's
it's
why
going to go on.
It should almost be a rule that if you take anything, tell us, let us clear it, and if you don't, tough luck.
Justice should not be a function of luck. If you and I walk into the exact same GNC and we buy the exact same product and you don't have anything contaminated and I do, what's the difference here? It is simply the order in which we drew something off the shelf. And yet you get to go away, keep going, you get your win bonus if you win, you get a $50,000 performance of the night bonus, and I have to be shamed and potentially locked away from the sport for 2 years because of a randomized order of product. That seems to me outrageous.
Yeah, it's a big problem. So let me ask you, Malki Kawa said that he was promised a title shot, and it seemed like that fight against Jacare was a #1 contender fight. At least as of right now, it seems like Weidman's getting the title fight. If it is in fact true, and if USADA agrees that he was wronged here, that he took something that was legal and it had, at the end of the day, an illegal substance in it, should he get the title fight?
Well, that's a different question. Stump me on that one.
The bottom line is, though, I don't feel like there's this huge outcry because of the way he won his fight against Jacare.
Exactly.
A lot of people thought Jacare won the fight. It's almost like he didn't make a big declaration at that fight that he was going to get it. It just seemed assumed that was because it was labeled as a #1 contender fight. But I didn't feel like there was this overwhelming want of seeing it after that event.
So you don't think they should do it?
Well, even Luke Rockhold had been sort of like, Vitor Belfort. He's naming everybody.
Well, he wanted the bigger money fight.
Of course.
A bigger name.
So, I mean, I guess they could be justified in doing it, but I just felt like it became sort of different after the fact, before, though, this stuff came out. So, I feel like they could go with the rematch, and it wouldn't really hurt that much.
I'm going to say, he should have got the fight. He got the W. I mean, I realize that there's the whole marketing side of it, and he's not the guy that is as readily marketed, but I don't think that there's I don't think there's not a Conor McGregor out there who's going to jump at the head of the line. There's not Chris Weidman fighting again. It could be a good fight, and he certainly was the champion. There's certainly some good things about it, but it wasn't the kind of fight where we walked away saying, God, I got to see that again immediately. Sure. I'd like to see it down the road, but I don't need to see it immediately. Romero won the fight, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with the decision or not. He's the guy that got his arm raised at the end. He won it. Your Denver Broncos won the Super Bowl. Whether other teams that think they were better, they weren't. That's the team that won the whole thing. They get to hoist the Lombardi Trophy. Romero won the fight. He should be getting it. And if this turns out that he walks away scot-free, he's the guy. But let's also remember, all we've heard from him and his manager.
Yeah.
We don't know. If we heard anything from USADA confirming that other things have been contaminated, we don't know all that stuff. So when that comes out, I think the story is still to be told.
Absolutely. Why'd you shake your head when he mentioned Chris Weidman?
Oh, I just think the fight. We have to have an immediate rematch that no one asked for.
What's the alternative, though?
Anything. Shadow boxing, Vitor, Jacare,
no, but honestly,
anything.
What is the alternative?
Anything. You mean to tell me that? So they're going to fight in December, and then when's 199? June.
June. Yeah.
So December, January, February, March, April, May, June. In a roughly 7 to 6 month span, you could turn Chris Weidman into the modern day Rich Franklin. That seems to me crazy. What are they thinking? This is they have in 2015 they made so many great decisions. This to me seems profoundly off the mark. Now, if Chris Weidman goes in there and wins, problem solved. But you're just rolling the dice. That's all it is.
Yeah.
This is insane to me. There's no justification for it
Max,
at all.
the same thing we were talking about before. It's the same sort of thing with Ronda Rousey on a lesser scale. Obviously, Chris Weidman is not the transcendent star that Ronda Rousey is, but it was the same sort of circumstance. You're saying like we're going to take a very vital piece to something who just lost in every possible way and was humiliated essentially in this big scene, and put her against the person who did it again and possibly just do away with the star for good. I mean, I'm not a big fan of it either. I was only pointing out, I guess, that, in that sense, that maybe Romero, there wasn't a big cry for Romero to get it, I think, after this sense. But, I mean, ultimately, I'd like to see Rockhold defend against somebody other than Weidman. I just think that it doesn't necessarily have to be Romero.
And then last point about this whole thing with the supplementation issue, again, if guys are just using it to camouflage use, then, may they be eaten by 1,000 wild dogs. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying there. But what I am saying is, if you really are a case, and I don't know, Tim means, I mean, look, you never want to do the eye test.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like an obvious contender for a PED. I mean, again, for all what that means, maybe it means nothing. But it doesn't just affect that guy. It affects the entire division. Because here we are having to make an immediate rematch with Weidman and Rockhold because the one guy who's supposed to be there is gone. It has far-reaching implications, which affects the show, which affects the calendar, which affects the sport. So like these things, they don't silo off into just Romero's little life. It's everyone's, and if you're going to do that, I think you should have really good grounds for it.
Okay, let's stick with the confusing title picture theme here for a second. Let's talk about the welterweight title picture. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, one of the great performances in a main event that we've seen in quite some time. I mean, that was virtuoso, that was mind-blowing, that was heart-stopping, whatever you want to call it. It was unbelievable. It was truly a joy to watch that. That was mixed martial arts, although there wasn't much ground game used, but at its finest, in my opinion. Comes in there, beats a former champion. Wow, what a performance. And now you have this dilemma if you're the UFC. Now, I will say this right off the top. I'm going to leave out GSP from this conversation. People seem to get annoyed that I bring him up as a legitimate player, even though it's a very real thing. But fine, to appease the masses, GSP isn't a factor. We can't play with him right now. What do you do if you're the UFC for Robbie Lawler? Wonderboy has some steam behind him. He's coming off a great main event, which, oh, by the way, was seen by over 1 million people on FS1. You have the Woodley fight, which increasingly feels like he's just kind of sitting out and waiting and campaigning, and people are kind of getting annoyed about that. You have Carlos Condit, who's coming off a Fight of the Year contender, and a lot of people, including myself, thought he won. I mean, they've got some options here. I don't know if there's a wrong one, but I'm curious to hear what you guys say. So let's weigh in on this. What do you do if you're the UFC for Robbie Lawler next? I
don't know how you guys feel. I think there's actually a lot of good answers to this one.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Look, Robbie needs some time off. He's had some wars, right? So we don't have to get right to him right away. If they wanted to do a Stephen Thompson versus Robbie Lawler fight, I don't think too many people would complain not named Tyron Woodley. It could serve as a nice co-main. It could serve as a main, depending on where you put it. It's got a lot of value there. It could be easy to sell. Look at the guy who went 10 rounds with Hendricks. Look at the guy who went 3 minutes with Hendricks.
Sure.
Kind of interesting. Okay, fine. That'd be kind of cool. But I think the better thing here, and it's normally not something I advocate, but because it's so unclear, I think some contenders should fight each other. Let's see who really is the guy who deserves to move up the ladder a little bit. You've got Maia and Brown. That seems to favor Maia, but MMA is crazy. Let's have Woodley fight Wonderboy. I'd like to see how that goes.
Interesting.
And one of those two guys, instead of then having a 4-man main tournament, I don't want to do that, but one of the winners there could get the nod. Meanwhile, Lawler gets some time off to heal and recuperate. I think that's the way to go.
And what do you do with Condit? Condit Rory?
Let's see how he wants to come back, if he wants to come back. Let's see if there's a permutation in one of those offerings not named a title shot that he would take. So play around, but just someone has to emerge. Thompson is kind of the closest to do that, but hasn't quite really set it over yet. Let's see if someone...
You don't think a win over Johnny Hendricks, former champion,
I think that win, I dedicated an entire podcast to it. I think it's phenomenal. I'm just saying there's not a lot of chatter of like, wow, this guy has to get the title shot next. It'd be a crime if he didn't get it.
Sure.
Let's get to that point.
What do you think?
Wonderboy.
Easy.
One word, Wonderboy. Look,
is that two? No, it's one word.
It's one word.
It's one word. I use one word.
That's right.
I mean, people rank differently, but certainly the way I would rank it, I had Lawler as the champion, #1, and the next guy I had on the list was Johnny Hendricks. And so, and Wonderboy was not in the conversation. And I remember, hearing conversations about, what does he need in order to get a title fight? And going into this, I did not think that he could put on a performance that would make him eligible for an immediate title fight, but that was the performance.
That was it.
This was Holly Holm beating Ronda Rousey in a sense. Not that Hendricks is like Rousey in terms
Sure.
of dominance, but in terms of just completely schooling somebody at a part of the game that they're not comfortable with, and just doing it in a precise way. It was just a beautiful performance. He finished the guy. He basically finished the guy immediately. I mean, I know it took toward the end of the first round, but he had the guy on his heels the same way that Holly Holm had Ronda Rousey on her heels right from the get-go. Great performance. I feel like he earned it.
And he finished the guy. I mean, Johnny Hendricks had never been finished before. In fact, his 2 losses were split decisions, and I felt like that was sort of a glaring thing. I know we were talking about it while we were out there. It's like, he was 2, judges' scorecards, squinting the way from being possibly one of the best pound-for-pound guys in the game going into this fight, just because of that, those losses. But basically,
here's a 3rd loss too.
Oh,
The story loss.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but that's going back a little ways. You're right. Thanks for mentioning that. But I think when you look at I was initially thinking Woodley should get it because I felt like he was already positioned there and where he was at. But then you sort of think of it and you think he was supposed to face Hendricks at 192. It's not, and then he didn't get the fight. It's not his fault that the fight didn't happen. But then this guy goes in and wrecks Hendricks. And it's weird when you stay idle how things can shift like this. Just bottom line is he's won a couple fights in a row. Now Wonder Boy comes along, beats Hendricks, the guy you were going to fight, and he's got 6 in a row, 4 finishes in that time. And he did it in such an aesthetically pleasing way. Like you're watching it and you're like, when you think of martial arts, your initial reaction is a fight like that, where you're watching a guy who it almost looks choreographed. It's so pretty. You know what I mean? Where you're like, wow, look at this guy, pick him apart. Amazing, right? So to me, I'm like, as I sort of thought about it, I was like, Wonder Boy seems like if you're going to make it out of the guys who are just available right now, and we need to give Lawler somebody soon, I would give it to Wonder Boy. But I tell you what, and I know we were both in Vegas, and we were you hear a little rumblings from people around the game a little bit, and you wonder about this whole Conor McGregor thing, is kind of going up. I have no idea if they're going with something where Lawler's going to rust up, and that means they're not going to book him immediately. Who knows what happens if he gets through RDA in March in a couple weeks and he decides, he talks to them about doing this, because it always seems a little asinine to contemplate, oh, this guy's jumping up weight class like this, but for some reason it doesn't seem as asinine when you contemplate McGregor.
That is a great point. It was brought up to me as well, and initially I dismissed it, but that is a thing that is out there. And how crazy would that be? How pissed off would all those people be? Like, forget about Frankie Edgar, because that's really an army of one. You'll have 4 guys who are pissed off at this point if Conor does that. But I wouldn't put it past them. That would be insanity.
Yeah.
I didn't even think of that one.
Well, then
right now.
also you start thinking about UFC 200 just sitting out there with nothing going on, and you
Yeah.
feel like, what would be the biggest possible thing they could do? Well, I don't know if that's the biggest possible thing, but that would certainly be up there.
Well, going back to the Wonder Boy thing, I think you nailed it, because unfortunately for Tyron Woodley, he's hanging his hat on the fact that he was supposed to fight Hendricks. Hendricks pulled out, and all right, look, that's like a victory for me. And at the time, it felt like a pretty good argument. Well, Wonder Boy actually fought Hendricks and picked him apart. So how do you? I don't know. I worry for Woodley's sake. He doesn't have a lot of the public support behind him right now, and I think the UFC is somewhat in tune with that. I mean, sometimes they go completely off the grid and book these immediate rematches that no one wants to see, but it's almost like, all right, who can get to, I feel like it's like, who can get to the UFC first here? Can Thompson get to the UFC first and get their ear? Can Woodley, who's been working at this and campaigning and stumping for a long time? It's going to be really interesting, because someone's going to be upset, because I think that there are a lot of good answers, as you said.
Well, I think also, speaking to what Luke said, if Lawler gets to the UFC and says, I think I need some more, I mean, really, a lot of it has to do with him.
Sure.
Is he ready to get in there again right away, or not right away, but in a reasonable amount of time? If that is the case, to me, it's Thompson. But if, like what you say, if he needs a little bit more time, then maybe there's time to throw some of these different moving parts in there together and see who emerges as the man. But man, coming off of that fight, boy, there's a lot of momentum there.
The one thing, just sort of as an aside, I know you mentioned it, a fight, or maybe it was you when you were talking about the picture itself, but if they could put together Condit against McDonald again, I just think that's a great fight. First of all, that they fought in Vancouver with the sort of dramatic end, and I know Rory McDonald has forever wanted to sort of avenge that fight. So that's the perfect fight for him in a lot of ways. He's been wanting that fight. And then for Condit, I feel like that's still, because I think in the rankings that McDonald's still number 1 right behind the champ. So it's like this is a chance for Condit to come right back if he's so inclined to keep fighting.
When GSP got the title shot, remember it was after the Trick fight, he got on his knees and begged, right? You should have, beating Hendricks is pretty close to that. But there was this crescendo, and I feel like the Hendricks win, while absolutely and entirely meritorious, just from what happened in the cage, like such such a profoundly amazing performance. But what is that his first win over a top 5 guy? I think it is. You should beat a couple of those guys. You should beat a couple of those guys before they give you someone who's the guy. And you know what? Look, I frankly like Wonder Boy's chances against Lawler, if I'm being honest. Based on what he did to Hendricks, are you kidding me? That's a great style matchup. But, you know, there's a lot of guys hanging out there, and it's like, who's the guy? Who's the guy? I don't know who the guy is, but I want to be shown who the guy is.
Yeah, fair enough. Interesting times at 170 pounds. Okay, let's move along. Let's talk about Jon Jones. Another interesting week for the
allowed
former.
to talk about Jon Jones. Can we call him and ask if it's okay?
We'll talk about it, and then we'll just delete this portion of the video.
Okay.
Well done. Although he's been doing less of that these days.
Yeah, I know.
Monday morning it came out. I think it actually was reported Sunday night locally in Albuquerque, but Monday morning it started to spread. I think the outlet, I hope I don't get it wrong, was KRQE in Albuquerque. They reported that Jon Jones had a little minor run-in with the law once again. January 31st, I believe it was. He was pulled over, didn't have license, registration, or insurance, proof of insurance when he was pulled over. And so now he has to appear in court. That has been pushed back. It was supposed to be on Wednesday. Now it's going to be end of March. And so this became a thing, obviously, because of Jon Jones's past. At first, I don't think anyone really truly understood, okay, like what's going on here when you just see Jon Jones pulled over? Wait a second, what's happening? And then you read about it, okay, these are minor things, but it's a thing. And you know about his history, and you know that they just officially announced his fight. And so it became a thing. Cormier's freaking out, he's tweeting about it, everyone's freaking out. And then Jon Jones, goes on Twitter and kind of says like, what the hell, guys? We're talking about, a traffic violation here? Really? Does Jon Jones have a point? Did we all overreact? Did the Albuquerque outlet overreact by making this a story? Or, given his past, given his recent history with the law...
Recent?
Long-standing. Long-standing, yes. Was this a valid news story?
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you have a driver's license?
Yes.
Have you ever been pulled over and gotten a ticket for the same infraction that Jon Jones got?
No.
Okay, I have a license. I've driven drunk before, and I've never driven without a license. Have you ever driven without a license?
I've been driving a car for a long time. I've never, ever not had my license.
Have you ever been pulled over for that?
I've never got my license.
So, okay, the defense rests, Your Honor. What a ludicrous thing to get mad at us for. I have defended Jon Jones. I will continue to do so. I do believe we live in a country where African Americans are treated lesser, even celebrities. I think this is a fact of life, not even worth debating. And I think Jon Jones has been a victim of that from day one, okay? But that aside, is he out of his mind? You have conditioned the public, not merely through infractions with the law, unique infractions with the law that have taken place behind the wheel of an automobile in very public, frankly, very embarrassing ways. And yes, he's right that speeding ticket or a parking ticket or something like that on probation, they don't want to put you back in jail for that. Most municipalities and various judges, they don't want to do that, okay? But it's not unheard of, first of all, for that to happen. That does happen on occasion. And to make an Instagram video like we're the ones who have been... I mean, here's what I would say. When he says on that video that he has been going to schools and living on a straight and narrow, I totally believe him. As good as he is as a fighter, and I think he's the best I've ever seen, he is that bad with a vehicle. That's how he is the anti-Jon Jones of driving. He's horrible at it. He doesn't know how to manage himself behind it. He makes bad decisions with it. He wrecked a Bentley, and then God knows whatever else happens with this last one. Like, for him to be shocked, how come people are so upset at me for doing something that wasn't all that bright behind the wheel of a car, whether or not it had serious consequences in the end, is a stunning lack of self-awareness.
The other thing as well is, I don't know about you guys, but like, at least, okay, my license is in my pocket, but my proof of insurance
stays in the car.
It stays in the car. Yeah, so I feel like you have to be extra careful when you're Jon Jones. And this didn't, at least I didn't see it, correct me if I'm wrong. Why did he get pulled over? Did he like
speeding, was it?
Was it even so? Like, if I'm Jon Jones, I'm stopping at every stop sign. I'm waiting 3 seconds. I'm going below the speed limit, like
a grandma on her way to Sunday church.
So that's the other thing.
It's crazy. It's like I live up in Western Mass, right off of Interstate 91. I'm always reading in the local paper about cars driving from, like, I guess New York up to Vermont, and they always got pulled over, and they've got like an entire trunk of heroin or something, and it always comes out that they got pulled over because they had a tail light out. And I'm always shaking my head thinking, okay, if I'm the guy who's transporting a trunk load of whatever, I'm going to make sure that I check all the taillights,
Sure.
and I'm driving 55 and 65 depending on the road I'm on. This is just, everything is about context.
Yeah.
The fact that Jon did not have his license and that his registration wasn't in the car, and okay, this is not a murder. This is not a horrible crime, but you're a guy who, as Luke says, this is a guy who has dealt with the law and the court system directly related to his being in a car. You need to go the extra step. If this was Holly Holm or anybody else in the Jackson team, Carlos Condit, name somebody on that team, and they got stopped and they didn't have a license while they were driving, it would be no big deal. But because you're Jon Jones, you just gotta understand that you have to go the extra step to make sure you stay clean. And if you don't do that, it talks a little bit more about you. It's more about you, Jon Jones, than it's about us. It's about you not understanding what you're doing. You just got to understand that you have to go the extra step in order to keep yourself clean.
It's sort of ongoing, this whole thing that you're talking about, and it's sort of almost like, it sort of reminded me of that Allen Iverson, you're talking about practice thing that was going on. It's like, you guys are talking about a ticket, but it's like with the oblivion, though, of why people would be talking about it. That's a special kind of obliviousness, you know what I mean?
It's amazing.
When Dana White used to get on to Nick Diaz and he'd say, he needs to learn to play the game at least a little bit. At least a little bit. Jon Jones is in a position where he has to play the game a lot of bit. He has to play it because that's his whole persona now. Like, everybody's waiting to see how much he's transformed. Do we want to believe him that he's turned his life around and all this? Of course. Everybody wants to believe that he's doing this. And everything that he's saying basically in defending himself, we all hope it's true. But this is that level of obliviousness that I feel like he keeps falling into. You're like, dude, why do you think we're getting upset with you? You're doing these things that I guess you feel exempt from, or you feel like are no big deal, but obviously they're within the rules that you're supposed to be playing by at this point. So in some ways I'm like, yes, it's one of those perfect storms where, yeah, it's probably blown out of proportion on a certain level, but not for him, because, and especially I think where it really gets egregious is him kind of coming out as not understanding that, you know what I'm saying?
He's drowning in young man syndrome even now. I'm invincible, nothing really bad is gonna happen, this will all be okay, I can take major risks without a whole lot of consequence. No, you cannot. You cannot do that. I mean, can you imagine someone on probation then getting in? Okay, you almost went to jail, and I wouldn't say ruin your life because he has some financial security, but certainly change the trajectory of it. If you knew that person and then they had probation and they got in a car and they had no insurance, no proof of registration, and you'd be like, get out of the vehicle. What are you thinking? And then to get on Instagram and be like, I'm being unfairly judged. No, you have been unfairly judged, Jon. This time you are absolutely. It's almost as if your reputation follows you in life. Funny how that works.
And how about the fact that this wasn't a violation of his probation? How lucky is he?
Right.
Could you
Again,
imagine?
in most places it's not.
Look,
it could have been worse. He could have been, under.
And we can say over and over again, this was not a big deal. This is not a big deal, but it leads to something. He gets stopped for this. Well, I know he's been talking about how he's changed, he's cleaned up his life, he's not smoking marijuana anymore. Well, does that mean that maybe it's impossible that like somewhere underneath this one of his the passenger seat there's like a little pipe there, or there's some residue somewhere in the car? If the police had wanted to make a bigger issue of it, there's a possibility that something could have happened that could have landed him in much more hot water. And the way to avoid landing in hot water is to not introduce the police to your life. And a way to not introduce the police to your life is to not do stupid stuff. If you don't do the stupid thing to begin with, even if it's minor, then it doesn't lead to the possibility of major stuff happening to you.
You ever seen that Chris Rock video? How to not get beat up by the police?
Yes.
He's like, think of laws as suggestions. Like, I wouldn't do that if I was you. Right. That's what you want to do, especially if you're on probation.
You mentioned Nick Diaz. I had the pleasure of talking to him before the Fox event in Orlando when we were at the open workout, and it was an off-the-record conversation, so I'm not going to talk about it. But I do think it's interesting to make the connection because he got in trouble with the law for a DUI not that long ago, before the Anderson Silva fight, and he was telling me how annoying it is that he has to have a driver as part of his deal. He can't drive, and by all accounts, he's stuck to it. Who knows what's happening in the middle of the night, whatever. Just get a driver. Just someone get him a driver, and just make sure that the guy is there 24/7 when he needs to go to the gym, when he needs to go to the restaurant.
But does he have the money for it? No way. He could start his own limousine company.
Yeah. And
all these fighters who are Uber drivers, surely he knows somebody who can jump in.
and I also will say that I think part of that, when he was talking about the quote unquote journalists, I'm sure a lot of people were writing him on Twitter and whatnot, and Instagram. Like, a lot of fans were probably being like, Jon, you moron. I actually think that it was coming from a good place. I think the world wants to see him come back. I think the world wants to see him fight Cormier. I think the world wants to see if he can regain his, his former form and be a great fighter and the GOAT and all that. So I think that people actually care to see him come back, and we're like, don't mess it up. Don't mess it up. You've got so much going for you. Like, we're not rooting against you, Jon Jones. We want you to get to April 23rd and beyond. So just stop giving us reasons.
Last thing about Jon Jones is Jon's like, look what I'm doing, all these things that are right. I'm doing this right. And I'm sure all that is 100% true. And in your interview with him, I did get the sense that he was like, I'm not sure where that kind of life was headed. But one thing he doesn't, like, you have to be very careful with Jon is he can do bad things in life or things that aren't good for him and still win in the octagon. Like, this whole bit about, like, I'm training in the octagon, I'm going to be ready to go. It's like, dude, we saw you win there when you were just acting recklessly out here. That doesn't tell us a whole lot. So, I think he wants to say, I've moved on from this personally, but the public hasn't had a chance to move on with you, with this. And then when you get a speeding ticket or whatever ticket, and you have and how do you have no license in your car?
Right.
It makes no sense. It's totally the worst risk management ever.
All right.
Jesus.
Let's move along. Let's talk about CM Punk.
My favorite.
Yes.
All right.
All right, so there's a new chapter to this story. It came out yesterday by MMAfighting.com that he needs back surgery. He had the back surgery. By all accounts, it was a success, and it's the same surgery, coincidentally, that Cain Velasquez had just last week. 4 to 6 weeks is the recovery time. So it's not career ending, at least for now, but important to note that he is 37 years old. Also important to note that he's been a member of the UFC since December of 2014. That's when they announced his signing. And just last weekend, we finally found out who they want him to fight, who the opponent is going to be. Mickey Gall. He beats Mike Jackson. We know that story. We don't have to go through it. Then the surgery news comes out. And I got to say, and I know we have differing opinions on this, and I don't really want to talk about like CM Punk's place in the UFC because I feel like we've debated this ad nauseum. Just to point out before we really get into the question I want to ask you guys is the vitriol and the celebration about his injury and demise was really bothersome. I mean, I tweeted that article and I didn't include his Twitter handle, and all the responses, I'd say 95% of the responses that I received, his Twitter handle was in it. So and he didn't retweet it, so he wasn't connected to the tweet. People just laughing and saying you're a fraud and stuff. And it's just like, just another sign that sometimes social media can be a very, very dark place.
And you were surprised.
I'm not surprised, but okay. So my question is,
You're a little surprised.
It was intense. It was really intense, and I wanted nothing to do with it. My question right off the bat is this Sage Northcutt 2.0 in the sense that it's more people laughing at the UFC, like your big experiment here with this phony pro wrestler is falling flat, and let's stick it in your face? Or is it CM Punk because of who he represents or who he was in the professional wrestling world? Because make no mistake about it, a lot of the people who are talking like this knew him from the pro wrestling world. Why do you think people are having this? Are they just tired of it? Why do you think that there's this reaction like, just please go, leave us alone, we don't want to hear this, we don't want to see this on our MMA websites? Because that's really, like, even when I had him as one of the topics today, a lot of the people tweeting me were like, please don't talk about this.
I got a couple of those too.
Yeah, and I found that to be interesting. He is a member of the UFC roster, for better or worse. Why do people have this reaction to the story?
Drawing the comparison to Sage Northcutt, this is, I think it's a different thing, because Sage Northcutt is a martial artist who is was being pushed probably faster than a lot of people would feel comfortable with, and then it came sort of to bite them a little bit. But I think that there's a lot of reasons why people were vitriolic toward him, none of which I support. I think it's ridiculous, some of the nasty stuff that gets said. But that's a guy who's a martial artist who's being pushed fast-tracked, and is making more money than some of the fighters with more experience, yada, 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 all that stuff. This is a whole different animal. This is a guy who comes from the world of fake wrestling, and there's a whole lot of reason for people to not want that guy to be around. And I think that the most of the nastiness is directed at the UFC, even though it seems to be aimed at CM Punk. I think it's really being aimed at the UFC. They're the ones that brought the guy in. CM Punk is a guy that's done pro wrestling for quite a long time, and then he decided this was his dream. He wanted to pursue it. I see no problem in, why would I want to criticize a guy for trying to pursue his dream? And here, of course, he has the advantages that other people, he'd have to go through tough or do some kind of, he'd have to impress Dana White and Nick the Tooth at some little show and somewhere. He's a celebrity, so he gets to jump the line. And so I guess you can complain about that. But I think this is vitriol aimed at the UFC for marketing things in a way that, we're starting to expect that now. But it's more almost the Bellator model of finding like sort of freak showish type things and putting them in the card. And there are some people that sort of don't think that the dignity of the game is being violated.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's more aimed, especially when you're talking about Sage Northcutt. I thought that most of the hate he was getting right after he lost to Barberina was all about the UFC. It was like he was getting fast-tracked. We've talked about this before. I mean, I didn't feel like a lot of it was his fault. He's just basically taking the fights and he was doing what he was asked to do and put into rather crazy circumstances on that last fight that we know about too. But I think it's just one of those things. There's a lot of people who like the purity of the game, or they like to see an organic sort of storyline develop within the game. And when they see these sort of forced oddballs come in, if Sage Northcutt is we discovered him, he's on the show, look, boom, where he's a star, and you're putting him on a main card, people don't dig it. We've seen this in other ways too, but I think that CM Punk is just another extension of that. Like he's a guy who has a 0-0 record. They're sort of catering to him before they even get to him by having this fight that was one of the more bizarre sort of settings for a fight to happen under the UFC, which generally speaking has been above that. And I think that that's one of those types of things that just doesn't resonate with fans. And so guys like CM Punk and Sage Northcutt basically become the targets for that sort of that sort of vitriol, like you mentioned, because they're just the players who are sort of casting those roles.
I don't have the least bit of sympathy for him. I'll just be honest. Now, let me correct that. For his injury, as a guy who's had back injuries, oh God, that's just miserable. But I guess you said quick recovery, 4 to 6 weeks. So
hopefully.
For his sake. But who knows what long-term injuries? And again, this might rear its head again if he makes it to the fight and then has another fight. This guy is probably going to have a number of injuries to contend with. And on that level, I have a human sympathy for him. But we live in a world where you could say what you want about the queue, but if people are standing in the queue and they see people jump the queue, the people who get jumped are going to say something about it. The people who are sympathetic to the people who got jumped are going to say something about it. And sorry, CM Punk jumped the queue. It's very simple to understand. You don't get to do that in life and then say, I also think you shouldn't say nasty things about me. Sorry, you wanted your opportunity. You want to dance in the big dance. Well, guess what? It comes with some certain costs that you have to pay. And it turns out when you do it, and you're doing it kind of poorly, right? I mean, 2014 is when he made the, and that's also UFC stuff too.
Sure.
They helped push.
They botched it.
Yeah, they botched it. I mean, they botched it big time too. I agree with these guys that it's not just about CM Punk; it's also about the institution and favorability and everything else. But I find it a little bit like, I'm sorry, this is what you asked for. Mm-hmm. You wanted to come and do this. Well, guess what? Pay the tax, and this is what the tax looks like. That's it.
And by the way, I'm not saying that he's complaining like, look at all the hate.
No, he's been quiet about
it. He's had his moments, but it's just interesting to see the reaction because you don't often see people celebrating someone's injury and whatnot. Here's the question that I think is super interesting.
What did he think was going to happen? That he was going to come and everyone was just going to welcome him with open arms? He knew what he was doing at a minimum defied convention. That's going to get here's here's how you know someone is a true iconoclast. Right? When someone breaks convention and it doesn't bother them that people's reactions to that are hostile. A true iconoclast does not care. If you break convention and then you say, poor me, why are you saying such nasty things?
But again,
you
for the
are
record,
not an iconoclast, period.
Again, he's not saying that. I'm the one bringing that up.
Give him time. You know he's going to. And it's not like he is Mr. Warm and Fuzzy on Twitter anyway.
Absolutely. But he has admitted in public, in interviews with me, that he understands the irony here. He used to be the guy saying, I hate the ones who cut the line, and now he did the same. He actually admits that. I mean, I think rather, and again, I feel like maybe my take is not one that's 100% valid because I knew him prior, but he's the one who said last week that the fact that Mike Jackson is not getting a shot at him is weird as well. Like, he's been pretty open about the weirdness of this whole situation.
The whole thing's crazy. It's hard to make heads or tails of it.
Sure.
I'm just saying, it's like, man, if you go and you do something that's really against what people are used to, you're going to have to eat a mile-long S sandwich, even if it tastes bad.
Okay, but here's the question that I wanted to ask you guys. in 2014, the UFC had maybe its worst year ever, right? From injuries to, not that many, big selling pay-per-views. I believe UFC 175 in July was their highest selling pay-per-view, and that was around 500,000 as far as what has been reported. And that was, blown out of the water in 2015. So 2014 was a particularly bad year for the UFC. At the end of that year, they signed CM Punk, and they come out with this announcement that, hey guys, in 2015, when the calendar changes, we got this big fish. 2015 was an amazing year, a historic year for the UFC. 600. Do they sign him in 2015, in December of 2015, or is CM Punk the reaction to the historically bad 2014? Is he the reaction to Bellator nipping at their heels and doing, you know what I mean? I wonder if he was kind of put in this tough spot because of
He's a product of that environment.
You know what I mean? And do they sign him 2 months ago after? Do they sign him at UFC 194 like they did on the December pay-per-view last year? That's what I wonder. That's such a fascinating thing. Was he a reaction to that bad year, or would they have signed him regardless?
I don't know the answer to that.
It's impossible to know, but I just ponder that.
That's a good question.
Real quickly about that, in defense of him a little bit, it's got nothing to do with him. You mentioned that the UFC would bear some responsibility here, and I think so, not merely because of what climate they were reacting to in which they may have signed him. I think it's a very excellent point. But also, I don't think they're used to doing this kind of stuff. Like just plucking a guy, not out of obscurity, he's popular, but in terms of martial arts background, there's nothing. They just brought him in. They don't know how to handle that very well because they so seldom do it. Brock was like ready to go, This kind of thing is really uncharted territory, and so announcing him, I bet if they did it again with someone in some kind of unique other similar circumstance, I bet it will be handled this will be a very big learning experience for them.
I was going to say, anybody who bursts on the scene like a supernova, from whatever context that comes, whether it's CM Punk coming out of the WWE, famous, big celebrity, he's coming in, or Sage Northcutt, who just is very likable and very, very bright and very and kind of interesting to watch compete. There's going to be something when anybody fails in whatever way, and not to say CM Punk has failed, but when he finds himself something's going negatively for them, it's going to draw this kind of reaction. If we go back in our time machine and the night that Conor McGregor fought Dustin Poirier, and Conor McGregor had done a lot of talking up to that point, if that fight went the opposite way, could you imagine the kind of vitriol that would have been headed toward Conor McGregor if he couldn't beat the number 6 or 7, whatever Poirier was, after talking all before
He'll get that vitriol if he loses on March 5th, too.
Well, it's true, but it would have been even bigger because he was already talking about beating Aldo, and this is way before then. He's a guy who was not even ranked. He's talking about he's going to beat Aldo. Now, of course, we know, fast forward, we know that it actually happened. But back then, he was talking a big game, and he was, the perception was that he was being fed opponents that were catering to him. If he had ended up losing like that, this stuff that's coming at CM Punk and the stuff that's been going to Sage Northcutt would have been nothing compared to what he faced. So ultimately, in the end, if you perform on fight night, you can sort of tamp down some of that stuff. McGregor, sure, he'll get some vitriol if he loses, but losing to RDA when you're already a champion somewhere else, man, as far as I'm concerned, the guy's already proven himself.
Right. Wow. How about that revelation?
This is not a revelation. He's proven himself.
It's a game of very harsh critics. I think that this fan base is as unforgiving as any that are out there. I mean, over a course of time, and I've been at it a long time now, like for a decade, writing about this game, and it's you were mentioning just being, I guess, surprised or taking it back.
Too naive.
Yeah. But same here, though. I mean, and at some point, that just keeps reinforcing, like, you know what, this is a pretty unforgiving fan base. They're smart, too. A lot of them really know, when they're being sold a bill of goods. Some people will happily go along with that and write sidecar, be like, yeah, that's fine. Others will be very against it, and I feel like you're kind of running into those two things with this, too.
So now what do you do with Mickey Gall? Like, okay, by all accounts, it's a short recovery time, 4 to 6 weeks, but the UFC has invested a lot of time in Mickey Gall. If for some unfortunate reason this comeback is delayed even longer, Mickey Gall is a kid who's 24 years old and fought for 45 seconds in the octagon. His first fight ever was a very short one in November. Do you keep this guy fighting? If so, against two, because he's very young, he's only 2-0, or do you just keep him on the sidelines and let him train and hope that CM Punk comes? What do you do there? Because they have invested a lot of real estate in him.
I got no idea.
No idea.
It's a problem that frankly this promoter should not have to worry about.
Interesting.
But they have brought it on themselves by engaging in this kind of
Shenanigans.
Promotional malpractice. No, but to do this kind of look, if you want to do this kind of thing, it carries risks, and they have unfortunately, and I wish it upon them or anything, but unfortunately they have encountered a few of these, and they're going to have to put their thinking caps on. But as far as I'm concerned, I mean, we talked about it before. Could they give them some of the tough Latin American guys? But even then, man, you know MMA is risky. You zig when you're supposed to zag, and you're staring at the lights like. Imagine if they complicated factors like CM Punk gets surgery, is on the men. Let's keep Gall busy. Gall gets stretched.
Yeah.
Now what do you do? It's like, oh my
okay,
God.
so let me ask you this: if let's just say Lorenzo Fertitta calls you up today, and says,
which I'm sure he will do,
says,
as is customary.
I want
Another media guy for Gall. Come on, Luke.
I want you to run the UFC. I love your viewpoints.
Yeah.
Is one of your first orders
That's
of
hilarious.
business cutting CM Punk and Mickey Gall?
Yeah, of course.
Cutting ties with both of them.
Yeah.
Despite even Mickey Gall, despite the Fight Pass treatment, the
I'm
attention,
sure
because you know Bellator would sign him.
or put him to the Ultimate Fighter, something like that. I think he's perfect for
But
that.
you would get him out of the UFC.
But I mean, there's just it's such an incongruous fit. You know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And you could say, okay, well, you missed on the pay-per-view with CM Punk. All right, that's fine. I mean, this is just my preference.
Sure.
Not the truth, any kind of book. But yeah, I'd cut him like that.
What would you do?
Well, I would be talking about a lot of other kind of things. If I get to run
That's
the
not
UFC,
your first order.
I'm working from the top. To me, the what's important in the UFC is the top down. So I'm going to make sure all the title fights are great fights, and all the stuff that happens down the bottom. See, I look at Mickey Gall as a guy. He's a Fight Pass fighter at this point. He looked great in those 45 seconds that he was out there, and so whatever happens to him. That's a Fight Pass problem. It's a problem at the bottom of the card. It's not a make or break thing for the UFC. And give him a fight against somebody who's not too experienced, and maybe he makes good. Maybe he does really well. Northcutt wasn't exactly a crafty veteran when they brought him in. Certainly was more of a veteran than this guy, but not too much. It's a bottom of the card problem. I don't think it's a big deal. I think that the thing with CM Punk, it's even that. I mean, yeah, they can make some money off him, but if it turns out that it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It's not a big deal. It's a much bigger deal to me if you get the wrong title fight or something like that at the top of the card.
It's a unique situation because Gall only really exists in the UFC because of CM Punk.
Yeah.
So in some ways, to just say like, go out there and fight, then all of a sudden you're dealing in that incongruity that you're mentioning, sort of saying, what is the point of all this? It's just a bizarre situation. But then again, he is a fighter, and I feel like if they do kind of give him out, even if he doesn't get stretched, he goes out and wins another one, you start to get the disparity in experience again. And I feel like that's the whole thing. They were trying to give him a guy who'd only had something like 0 fights or 1 fight or 2 fights. Suddenly he's got 3 and he's 3-0. He suddenly becomes almost too big for CM Punk. It's a weird problem, but
that's interesting.
yeah, I don't know. I really don't even know what they do. If I'm Gall at this point, if I'm the UFC and you're trying to keep it going, I tell Gall like, hey, let's wait and see how he handles himself, and you just wait.
Last thing about this, years ago I worked for a promotion called the Ultimate Warrior Challenge, the UWC. They've since gone defunct for a long time. That was the promotion, if you might recall, that had on Jason David Frank, the old Power Ranger. And he was an amateur at the time, and this was a pro show. Many UFC guys came from UWC. Brendan Schaub, John Dotson, the list goes on. And I remember it was good at what it was supposed to be. It was good at attracting attention. Like his videos got more attention, and there was a higher gate that night and everything else. But then he goes and he fights, and he wins, but he threw his back out in the middle of getting tackled. And it was like, in the end, it was kind of maybe interesting to try, but it was. I just feel like after this is over, the UFC is gonna be like, okay, we had enough of that one. It doesn't work together. They're 2 different products. It's not about CM Punk trying MMA. It's about trying it in the UFC. It changes everything. If he goes to Bellator, David Batista, I would be much less complaining about because he's a real martial artist and has the same kind of Q rating.
Okay, final point.
I was just going to say, it's a UFC experience, and just kind of going, because I felt like the James Toney thing was like in the same situation, although he did come from he came from boxing where he was very decorated and all that. But I felt like this had the same sort of thing, like what is this all about? Because you knew what was going to happen in that fight. You sort of knew how this outcome was going to be, and you're sort of like, well, what is the point of it when you kind of know that? You know what I mean? I feel like that's unfortunate where we're at with CM Punk at this point. Either he never fights, which is a possibility at this point, like where we're going through all this and he never even steps in the octagon at all, or he gets in there and it's just not the happy story that some people, I guess, when they signed him, thought it might be.
All right, we shall see. On that note, we say goodbye. Thank you very much for watching the show once again. We are back next week. That is great news. Minus Luke Thomas. He'll be in, and this is the best part. He'll be in Houston covering the Kimbo Slice after all of that.
Hey, everyone seems to think there's some incongruity about this. There is not. I'm not going there to watch.
It's a beautiful thing.
Kimbo Slice compete because it's somehow the top of the food chain.
You're going to watch Shamrock and Gracie.
Yes,
baby.
of course. That's much better. Now, last point about this. If you want to have an organization where you're having the best fight the best, then have that. If you want to have an organization where it's just a donk fest, then have that. But nary the twain shall meet.
I just love the symmetry there of you, of all people, being.
You think I'm going to go there and be like Jeremy Bonner, wearing no pants, watching Kimbo Slice? I'm going to be snoozing. Are you kidding?
All right. But we will be back next week, so that is the good news.
Ribbing me, I'm sure.
All right, thank you again for watching. It's an MMA free weekend coming up, so take a minute to catch your breath. A very busy one coming up next weekend. For now, we say goodbye. That is Luke. That is the birthday boy. Jeff, once again, happy birthday, my friend.
Thank you.
That is Chuck. I am Ariel. We'll see you next week. Enjoy your weekend.